Oh, so good to see you guys. I wish we were doing this in New Orleans more than anything. We've I know that Laura, of course, spent so much time there, but we've all been there together several times.
Yeah, I think we all would agree that we're in love with New Orleans and want to get back there in physically as soon as possible.
Feel very cheated that we're doing this and we don't get to go have a drink afterwards at one of our favorite places. Yeah. But here we are. And
yeah.
Always happy to be in service to the Tennessee Williams Festival, which is a terrific event. And I'm glad that it's going on in its virtual incarnation this year.
Absolutely. And here's to next year and being back there.
Yes.
I believe it. I know it will happen. But maybe we could start by talking, because we all Zoom all the time. So we're all in this doesn't usually happen, but we all have books coming out this year. And I was lucky enough to read galleys of both your books, Dream Girl and The Collective. And so we have the benefit that we did get some things done before the International Nightmare began. But how has this year been for all of you, and what's it like having a book coming out on the other side of it?
You know, it's my second virtual book tour coming up because I had a book of essays out last year, and there are things about the virtual book tour I quite like. I mean, I miss the energy, I miss people, I miss being in actual places, but I also appreciate the fact that potentially we can reach so many more people. And so if the idea really is to get the word out about your book, that seems to be a greater opportunity. And the book tour becomes more spaced out. Instead of trying to do 10 things in the first 8 days, you can do 1 or 2 things a week for many weeks. And it feels as if you're reaching a lot of people. I mean, I'm really interested in how everybody's writing was affected, or how anybody's job was affected. A year ago today, I was already a little bit late with my book. I had renegotiated my submission date. And then, 2 weeks into that, it was like, oh, and my kid's not going to school anymore. And we're back to virtual school. And no one knew what was going on or how long it was going to last. And I found myself, I literally lose count of my books, which sounds like a weird kind of humble brag, but it's just really a commentary on how bad my memory is. This was my 24th or 25th book. And it was interesting to me to travel full circle back to the days when I had a full-time job and I had to get up very early in the morning and work 2 hours or so before the day really kicked in so I could go to my job. And that's what got me through, because it was like, I know how to do this. I will get up very early. I will write until I have to get my daughter up around 7:30 or 8, and then I don't have to worry about it because I got my writing done. And in that way, I did finish my book by June 1st. And for me, it was a great relief to have this narrow, and in some ways it felt meaningless. It's like, I can't believe I'm getting up and working on a book every day when it feels like the world is ending. But it gave my days structure and purpose. And I was really grateful for it. I felt like the life of a novelist. And I know that there were other people who were like, I can't write. I can't write. I felt lucky to be so deep into a project that there was no choice but to finish it. So that's where I was. I don't know where, I mean, Alison, you didn't go into your copy edit till late at the end. Am I right about that?
During the pandemic, yeah, I was in the copy edit towards the end of the summer, I think, or around there, and I was doing revisions during the start of the pandemic. So, I agree with you during that. I mean, especially like having, this project that I knew what was going on and I knew when it supposedly took place. Weirdly enough, the book takes place in February of 2020. So it's just sort of right in that little edge. So it was kind of good, because then my epilogue takes place in the first week of March 2020, which is basically like 50 years later. So it was kind of beneficial to have it sort of happening at the same time, because it took place so much in the present. And I felt the same way, Laura, that, to me, the writing lent some structure to my life at the time. Starting another project as I am now has been really difficult for me. I keep changing around on when I even want to set it, because it's so impossible to tell the future now, what the world's going to look like when these books come out, when our books after these books come out.
My work in progress is set April of 2019 through February of 2021. And I decided I'm writing a historical novel. I'm writing a novel that, and it's not about COVID, but it's very much, that's the backdrop. I was like, well, people, still wrote novels during world wars, and that's what was going on. But, it wasn't front and center necessarily. This is going to sound so bizarre, but, I read so many children's books as a kid, and because of the children's librarian mom. Did any of you read the Moffat books about this family in Connecticut, the Middle Moffat? A lot of those books took place during World War I, but because it was from the point of view of a kid, you just felt like it was sort of off to the side. There was rationing, there were these things that happened, and there was, victory. So I kind of keep that in mind, which is like, life goes on, even in the middle of this thing. And so I'm hoping that works. I mean, Megan, your book is clearly set in a before time, right?
Well, I have to say it's so interesting because I never set my books in any time. I mean, my first few that are set in the bins of the last century, I do, but mine always sort of, I try to have as few references. I want them to be kind of fairy tale-ish, so I kind of avoid this, but it is so interesting because we all finished, or Alison was a little further finished copy at it during this weird time. And all our books coming out this year are all kind of about nested or cloistered or trapped environments, even though none of us started them during this, but we all finished them. As mine's this sort of ballet school, and Laura, you have someone who's stuck at home, and Alison, you have this sort of, I don't want to be too spoilery, but you have lots of things. There's how would you put it? I don't want to spoil it. You have a kind of hidden network.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
A secretive hidden network behind the surface of things. So we're all sort of different cloistered or clustered or hothouse environments, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and the people in my book connect online, just like we're doing right now, but in a very different way. So yeah, I think I think a lot of, there must have been something going on in the collective subconscious before.
We all, we must have some. I mean, it'd be
Or
like
we were psychic somehow.
something. Yeah, I have to feel.
Is it the birds all fly away right before the tsunami or something like that? Because especially reading Rumaan Alam's book, I'm going to get the title wrong.
Leave the world behind.
The world behind. And you literally have these animals responding to some unnamed, undefined, tragic event. I feel like we're all kind of like the deer in Rumaan's novel, and we're just beginning to roam in great numbers. And people were just sort of paying attention, I guess, to their own inner anxieties. And, I think one of the mistakes people make when something huge happens, and I think we saw it with 9/11, is like, if you want to rush in and like write the definitive 9/11 novel, that's really hard. I mean, that's setting yourself up, because everybody has an opinion and everybody's going to have their idea about what it really meant. But if you can kind of put this stuff in the background, I think it's really powerful. And I think that's what a lot of the fiction we're seeing right now was picking up on, the background noise, like the stuff that was like, maybe people were writing very overtly political novels in 2019, which seems pretty daring to me, but it was more interesting to me just to see what people were responding to in their own anxious fever dreams.
What you're saying, it reminds me so much of the novels and other works of art right before Hitler took power, and not to make you draw any comparisons, but I always think of sort of cabaret, or I just read this Nabokov novel that he wrote in 1932 while he was living in Germany, and that one's not at all about Germany per se or what's going on there, but you feel this anxiety, and part of it is what we bring to it reading it after, but part of it was obviously there was so much happening at that time, and it all bleeds through. Like I can say I'm not going to write anything related to the pandemic, but it's going to be in there because that's what writing is, right?
The book I'm working on now, it's the first time in my life where I'm thinking about, I'm writing about people, I'm always writing about people who are not exactly like me. But in this case, one of the characters is in commercial real estate. And he's married to almost a professionally good liberal woman, someone who's really caring and philanthropic. But, I was like, oh my God, he probably votes Republican, because he votes for the economy. And these are the people we don't talk about. We spent so much time talking about the MAGA people and the people who treat Trump as almost like a cult leader. But, there weren't enough of them to elect him. And there weren't even enough of them to get him to 71 million. And I'm really interested in those people who are intelligent and see themselves as down to earth and are just like, but he's good for the economy. I'm voting for my wallet. And it was such a realization to like, oh my God, there are a lot of Trump voters in my book.
Do you bring that up in your book, Laura? Like, do you actually explicitly say that, or is it just something you know about the character while you're writing?
I think that internally that character will acknowledge to himself that, so like I got to do my math. As 2020 goes on, I think he's going to be like, but he's good for the economy. It's like, I'm trying to think at what point there was a tipping point for some voters where they're like, okay, now I think at a certain point there did come this moment. What am I grasping for? Because it seems to me there's a very seminal moment in 2020 where some people were like, okay, now he's gone too far. It's
the stuff at the border probably for a lot of people. But
you think, oh, sorry, I was just going to say,
yeah.
It's making me think of, Alison, in your book, you're writing about a woman who feels very disaffected and disconnected from what's going on, and who is maybe somebody who would be vulnerable to a lot of these conspiracy theories, or because she feels she's been so, maybe you can talk briefly about the premise, so they say it in a non-spoilery way.
Yes. Okay. So it's really, this woman is just full of rage to the point of where it's crippling and paralyzing, because her daughter was killed 5 years ago and murdered in her mind in very shady, complex circumstances, where the young man responsible never paid the price. There was a trial, he was acquitted. And so it ruined not only her life, obviously, as it would when you lose a child, but it ruined her marriage. She lives this very solitary life in the Hudson Valley, and she's been consumed by rage and hatred of this young man. She's kind of recruited or manages to find a group of similarly minded mothers online on the dark web, who seem to be collectively and systemically all together, each one of them doing a little part, killing these people that are responsible for the deaths of their children and who have not been brought to justice. It's so hard for me to ever do an elevator pitch where I'm not spoiling, but it seems that's what it is. So it's a kind of a secret collective of rage-filled, murderous mothers. Never underestimate the anger, female rage, and that's really what it's about. So yeah, it's this woman is it kind of brings to mind a lot of the. I've been doing a lot of research on conspiracy theory for my work in progress, which deals with somebody that becomes the target of these groups. But this is a group. It's a group that it's not QAnon, it's not anything like that, but it is a group that meets online and which is fueled by disaffectedness and anger and rage and a desire to have some power when you feel powerless. So, yeah.
I'm curious about this. I have a question for both of y'all. We've all been at this for a pretty long time, and I feel like the things that initially drew me to crime fiction, I mean, I love crime fiction, but I feel like the impulses that I followed into the field are completely different than the impulses I have now when I sit down to write a story. That wherever I started, I can barely, like, that doesn't, like, I'm no longer interested in someone was murdered who did it. Even though that can be a big part of the story, that's, I mean, I wonder if y'all have kind of been on that same journey where what brought you in is no longer what obsesses you. And what are you using crime fiction for now?
Boy, you know, I never was interested in that. I love it, but that was never what made me write. It's just so fascinating, because I also don't know what I would do without that, because that's how I think of story. I think of this engine that a crime gives you, but what I was always interested in is what extremes it pushes people to and what you find out about them when they're in that place. So for me, it was always character psychology. What has changed, I think, is that and I still tend to write very insular, you know, really close short time period or to books. But I do think I have the way I have changed, and maybe they're related, is that I do think about what I'm doing and why more, what I'm saying about women in particular, and about gender and power. I try to think about when I'm writing, but I think about it when I'm conceiving of what this thing is, and the things I don't want to do. So you know, I think I never thought about that before. It would never have, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, but I do now.
What about you, Alison?
Yeah, I think it's I think as the older I've gotten, the more sort of closer to home, closer to actual my own personal feelings, my fiction has got. And I started out writing it, you know, I mean, not so much as a desire to figure out who done it, but a desire to scare myself. And I think that's still my main motivation. Like I've always loved just writing for my own entertainment and scaring myself. And when that started, it was more, you know, I guess more sort of serial killer books and things like that. I mean, as I've matured in my life, the things that there are so many things that scare me more than the potential of a serial killer out there. You know, what those I'm close to might be capable of, and finally what I myself might be capable of. Those are the scariest things to me. Like what anger what rage, what grief could drive you to do, you know, what you could see yourself doing, what things that you never knew about yourself, but then turn out to be true, you know, taking a mirror to that. That's scary to me. So I think it's sort of become more personal. And you know, I used to be in a writing group a long time ago when I was, you know, first writing fiction. I was the only fiction writer in the group. Everybody was writing memoirs, so you can imagine how helpful that was. Wow, you can make stuff up was basically what my comment was. But
maybe somebody should die.
Yes, exactly. Right. So so people like they always say, you know, why don't you ever write a memoir, right? And I feel like in some ways we are writing memoirs. I mean, I think what we do is we take emotions that we're familiar with and we hang these stories on top of them, you know, and it's a good way to get that stuff out.
I mean, I guess I was always writing about something that was of interest to me. With my very first book, you know, the idea was if you don't get to be that thing vocationally that you always told yourself you wanted to be, what are you going to be instead? Like what happens when you can't be your career and you always thought you would be your career? But now it's just so more nakedly like, this is what I'm obsessed with. This is what I'm anxious about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, certainly Lady in the Lake, I was just like, I got to sit here and deal with appropriation, and not only appropriation of Black pain, but just in general, working from true life inspiration. Am I doing something ethical? Am I doing something unkind? Do I do it well enough? Like, what are the considerations of that? And then I segued immediately into this very internal book where it was like, I'm so scared of dementia. so terrified of it. I don't know many people who aren't. And I also really wanted to deal with kind of the hubris of my able-bodiedness, which was something that I had never dealt with on any level. It was just sort of like, well, I'm really healthy and I take good care of myself and I deserve this sturdy vessel in which I live. And it's kind of like, this could all come crashing down with a single trip. Like, what if this idea of yourself that you're so healthy and hale and hearty, how fragile is that at the age I'm at? And it is fragile. And so I was like obsessed with that. And I just kind of keep moving from obsession to obsession. I have another question I want to talk about because this comes up. I mentioned appropriation, but God, how am I going to word this? So I don't worry if I give offense. I really feel like right now we're hearing a lot of white guys complaining in our field about how hard it is to be a white guy. And then they're like, you won't let me write as someone who's not a white guy because that's appropriation and you're telling me my stories don't count. And I feel like the people who are complaining, because obviously this is not all white guys and there's still some wonderful work being done by cis white men. I feel like it's really an excuse and a whine, and that they're not making a good faith effort to engage in a culture that's asking them to just, maybe you're not the default. Maybe it would be interesting if you ever started a book and you didn't assume that everyone who wasn't a cis straight white man had to then have themselves explained, but that the white guy is like normal, that this is where culture is centered. I mean, I'm really impatient with this. It's making me kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also think for years, especially when Megan and I had our first books come out the same year, but I feel like, around that time, especially, like a man could do anything he wanted with his main character. Women were so pressured to make our characters likable, if we have a female main character. And if you don't, it's like you're saying something about women as a whole. And I think that's kind of true the way people were, like, you couldn't write a sort of an anti-hero or an unreliable narrator or anything like that happened to be a woman or happened to be someone of color, because you were therefore making a statement about the entire community. No one ever said that, like, oh, you're saying all white straight men cheat on their wives, or they're all or they're all big drinkers, like if that's what you did for your character. Now, there is the freedom to write characters that are not perfect, that are, that have flaws, that are, quote, unlikable. I don't think there's the same sort of guidelines, which always irritated me, as someone who was told that I write unlikable characters. I think I like that freedom now. So I think the complaining about the entire system, like, you don't know how good you've had it for so long. We're just trying to catch up, even things out, and have everybody be able to tell their stories.
The thing that I can't figure out about this complaint, because I hear it a lot, Laura, you're right, is like, to be a writer is to be curious about everything that's not your experience. That's why you do it. And you want to have your mind blown with how narrow it was before and how binary you saw the world. And I love how uncomfortable and thrilling and exhilarating it is to sort of look back at my younger self and how simply I saw matters of sexuality and gender and what this opens up, and to see something like I May Destroy You, that brilliant TV show last year that like fractures narrative in this way that like everything, all the rules are going out the window, and like what could be better for writers? So to me, I don't understand that fear is just that sort of, get off my lawn kind of way of thinking about it. And I also never want to be that, I don't want to be the person who wants to be the person that is fighting change all the time and not even listening to it. That's, to me, that's not a writer I want to read.
It's also terrible that you continue to hear, although people are at least becoming smart enough to kind of mute this, but it's still out there. The idea that crime fiction as a genre can only achieve diversity and inclusivity by sacrificing merit, which is the most offensive and terrible thing. It's like, no, that's not true. And this idea that when we look for diverse voices, when we're like, more people should be telling their stories. I go to a bookstore now. I just did this on Saturday. And I went to a bookstore and I was like, I'm not walking out of here with 8 books by middle-aged white women. That's not broad enough. And, I just made a point of making sure that what I bought was diverse in terms of race and age and sexual orientation, because I want to make sure I'm reading more broadly. I want to broaden my own horizons. And I was so delighted because my 10-year-old daughter does this instinctively. She picked up an Angie Thomas book. She picked up a book about 2 guys in their 20s who are falling in love. It has something to do with Broadway. She's like, I'm like, I'm sure it's fine. It's in the kids section. I don't know what's going on. But, I was like so heartened to see that she is immediately interested in people who aren't exactly like her. And I think most readers are. And anyone who's curious about people, I don't know. I actually was cleaning my office and I found some old anthologies, and I'm not that old, like 5 or 6 years old. And I opened up, I looked at the table of contents, and it was like, this is 95% white men. And I just can't believe anyone thought that was a meritocracy and not a judgment of their own very narrow, blinkered lives.
Yeah, well, that changed me the subject slightly. That makes me think of another thing, because Laura, I really think of your novels as social novels, but above all, that they're very, you're standalones, and it's, I mean, I just feel like they're in conversation with all novels. It's making me think, and I wonder how much we're talking about how experience in the world brings all these other layers to the stories we're telling. We have this, and also sort of peels off these layers in us too. And it was making me think about when we go to other forms, because I've been doing a lot of TV work this year. Laura, you had a book of essays. Alison, you two both write a lot of short stories, and what those sort of jaunts out into something else give, and do you bring that back? Because in a short story, just like with a script, you can really go into some place that you would never spend a whole novel in. It can be riskier, you can take more chances. For me, that's one of the exciting things about it. But I wonder for all of you what it's like doing those other projects and then coming back from them.
Yeah, I think there is definitely the idea of, taking chances. Where Laura and I are both in the Best American Mystery and Suspense collection this year, and Laura's story is great, called Slow Burner, right? It's a just fabulous paranoid marriage short story, and my short story it's called Where I Belong, and it's from the point of view of a really angry young man, and just, I mean, I think he's really kind of a jerk, and I would never write a whole novel about this guy, but he was just somebody that I really wanted to explore within, a few thousand words. So I think it gives you the freedom to sort of inhabit characters that you wouldn't want to spend an entire year with, but would love to just sort of take a dip in the pool with, and I think it's sort of like it's sort of like Laura holding a plank for a really long time, or like doing some kind of extreme exercise. Then you come back out of it, and you're sort of more flexible in that way. You're stronger in that way, and you've had that experience.
Much healthier project than mine. See if I can hold this wine bottle up as long as possible.
Yeah, Megan, I'd love to know about how your TV work has sort of informed your fiction. I mean, how they sort of fed off of each other.
I was worried the TV was going to steal you away from us as a novelist.
I have spent most of the year working on TV because I finished my novel, I think 2 months into the pandemic. So for me, back to sort of where we started, like you were saying, Laura, having something I had to do was so important, and script work, you have deadlines, people are waiting on you, you get notes, you have to revise it again. It's more like journalism in that way. And it really saved me this past year because, as Alison said, the thought of starting something during this has been a novel. It's been really hard, but it's sort of like entering into a marriage, and I would prefer these one night stands right now. Thank you very much. It's sort of it. You have to also defend your decisions immediately and all the time in TV. So it really has been interesting to think about. I thought a lot more about this year about the kind of thing you've been talking about, Laura, which is what am I really saying here? Why am I saying it? Why am I saying it? And it's been good for like some sort of macro level thinking, and on a technical level, in TV, structures the only thing that matters almost. It's such a structure driven, scripts are so structure driven, and there's so many sort of secrets to it all, and so I think that has infiltrated the way I think of novels, not necessarily in good or bad ways, but it's seeped in. So I think it's been in ways both good and remains to be seen.
Yeah, and as for the essay writing, I think the main thing I learned from doing that is that it was like taking a mask off and showing the world that all these dark, horrible ideas are really part of me. And I was really glad to put the mask back on. I don't know why I had that impulse to write all those essays, and I don't feel it right now. I'm not feeling, there's like one essay I'm kind of tooling around in on the side, but I'm taking it very slowly, and I don't want to do another book of essays. I actually, I think that I was writing essays and I was doing them on my own schedule, and it was like, let's make it a book. And it was like, we need all this fresh material. And there was a certain sense of, having to produce faster and more intensely than I wanted to. And I didn't get to live them as much as I wanted to. So I think the main lesson I took away from that was that's something I need to do on my own time, according to my own impulses. I would never commit to that again. Novels, I'm just always like, I wandered into the novel I'm working on 3 months ago, inspired by a throwaway line in a podcast, the podcast You're Wrong About. And after 3 months of being kind of crazy and lost and just writing reams of stuff and not knowing where it goes, I sat down and I outlined for the first time in my life. And I'm still terrified of it because it was like, oh, I played with the voodoo and now it's going to be wrong. And it's like the leech woman, when you drink a woman's blood instead of the man's blood, everything goes backwards. But, I still feel like, I feel like it's very much a novel about bodies. If that makes sense. I don't know, it's just about bodies and what happens to bodies and the female body. And
well, the body is a big focus in Dreamgirl too. So
it's also huge in your book.
Oh yes, that's true. Yes, that's very true. Maybe that's something to do with women right now. It's sort of like all the stuff. I feel like a lot of the masks have been off about in this sort of second wave of Me Too, about this sort of complicity of women in some of these sort of really destructive notions of what of the female body and what it should or shouldn't be. And maybe that's part of it, because I mean, both of you in your books coming out this year really feel like they would not have been written, at least in that way, before the Me Too movement, even though it's very different.
Someone on Twitter actually, meaning to compliment me, criticized me for something they considered woke. And first of all, I'm cool with being woke. I actually think it's something to aspire to. The book I most recently read is a book called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And it's a terrific combination of memoir, reporting, activism. And, I got to the end of this book and I was like, okay, I not only have white privilege, I have, she would call it straight body privilege.
Mhm.
Like, and when you begin to, and then it becomes a form of ableism as a kind of privilege. And thinking about all of these things, I think this is where I get upset with people. People act like asking them to think about other people is so burdensome.
Yes.
Please,
Well,
right?
it only is to the people who've never done it before in their lives, so we all know who they are.
Please don't ask me to imagine what life is like for another person. And in the book I'm working on, and this is a question I'm still wrestling with, it is not by necessity, but it is by design, I'll say. It's a book with two straight white characters at the center. And given that the situation they're in, that just makes sense. And it's like, okay, to what extent can I make this book diverse and inclusive without creating secondary characters who are only there to be like, you go, girl. Like, here I am, the magical person of color who will help you on your journey. Here I am, the person who defines themselves and uses different pronouns. It's like, I'm really struggling with that, but I consider it an honor to struggle with that. I consider it such a useful way of saying, what can I do within the scope of this story I've created that adds layers and recognizes how different people are and how many different ways there are to be in the world we live in. And like, again, like the idea that that is burdensome in any way, to have to think about another, if that's burdensome, you shouldn't be writing fiction. I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And Laura, just because I realized we didn't really do it, can you talk about the Dream Girl, the premise? Because I've sort of danced around a bit, but you really do have as your main character the kind of person that has never been bothered to think about what it's like to be anybody else. So,
but who thinks he's so good at it? Dream Girl is so very obviously an homage to Misery. It is less obviously also an homage to a beloved Philip Roth novel, Zuckerman Unbound. And the idea is that a successful literary novelist has taken a terrible fall in his apartment and has an injury severe enough that he's going to be bedbound for weeks. And the one thing I immediately wanted to do, though, is, because this really is part of my experiences, and I bet y'all have it too. Obviously, in Misery, the character meets his number one fan. It seems to me that I travel in a world where so many people wish to write and no one wants to read anymore. And so there are no fans in this book. Everyone's a wannabe writer on some level. And I wanted to just get inside a writer's brain and, used a lot of my own brain, this interest in words. Can I say this? Can I say that? Why can't I say this anymore? Why am I not allowed to notice this anymore? Why, like this idea again of really, why are you asking me to be so sensitive to other people? And to do all of that, I mean, this is actually probably, I think, my biggest recurring obsession, which is the most dangerous people in the world are people who consider themselves well-intentioned. I'm like, that's much more terrifying than Hannibal Lecter is the person who's like, I'm a really good guy. I'm just such a good guy. And if I have a limitation, it's that I'm such a good guy. To me, that's the most terrifying person ever.
Yes,
lived.
I always think of it as the Deadwood conundrum, where no matter what, Seth Bullock, the sheriff, he's the one you got to watch out for, and Swearingen is the supposed villain, is the one who knows himself, and that's the safer. That's the person you want to be in the mine shaft or the foxhole with.
Alison, whenever I think of your work, and I really do think it's sui generis, I feel like you created an Alison Gaylin novel that nobody else writes. And it's so much centered in family. Is that fair? Am I getting that right? Because I feel like
Yeah.
no one really writes about modern families the way that you do. And I kind of wonder if that was deliberate, if it's something you stumbled into, if you had a role model, but it's really quite wonderful.
I think it comes back to my whole desire to write about what scares me, you know? So yeah, I mean, I think that at least personally, I feel just defined by my role in, various families, whether it's as a daughter, wife, mother, friend, that's a type of family. The way you interact with other people and the way those other people shape you, can make or destroy you, or both, usually both. So yeah, I just, it seems to be a pretty deep mine to go to as far as, and I do keep going back there, as far as, finding story that's just sort of rich. I mean, in If I Die Tonight, I was thinking about, how well do you know your child, which is a question a lot of writers ask. But then in the next book, Never Look Back, I was like, how well do you know your parents? They were fully formed people before they even had you. They were, they have secrets that you will never know, even after their lives end. You will never know. My dad passed away in 2002, and I know him as this wonderful father and a man, but I know he had experiences that I'll never know about, that that he never, just like my daughter will never know, hopefully, about my certain experiences I've had in my life. So yeah, I think the mystery, there's like an inherent mystery and suspense and terror in writing about families. And so yeah, I do just kind of keep going back there. And I think my latest book again is sort of, when you lose that family, what that turns you into.
I mean, you were always good at zeitgeist, because If I Die Tonight, was very much about social media and about how a teenager would use social media. And then, you had a podcaster and Never Look Back. And I feel like you're actually really good at being a couple of steps ahead of the things that other people are going to write about and try to do like a year or two.
It takes place largely on the dark web. So I
was gonna say, I do feel like I'm worried about the prescience of the collective in terms of where the culture is going.
kind of terrifying. Exactly.
Speaking of the dark web, the one thing about the short story Slow Burner that I just wish more people would pay attention to is that I do believe that I created the way that you could run a murder for hire scheme without financial detection. Mm-hmm. And I was very, very proud of that. I feel like, I always feel like, when I set up my prostitution business years ago when I wrote And When She Was Good, I was like, a prostitution business that fronts as a lobbying firm specializing in parody for women. I'm just like, I always want to be on Planet Money. I'm always like, people don't get, I'm actually really good at business.
illegal Planet Money.
I feel like Michael Keaton in Night Shift is like, I'm a little recorder and I have my ideas.
There is something sort of thrilling about figuring out how you could do something so nefarious, and how you can make it work. I mean, actually the collective is a lot about that, but it is, we're all coming up with these things in our minds, Megan, in your books, the very, I mean, every one of your books has something in there that yes, they are character driven. Yes, they are dark and deep, but there is a crime in there that makes perfect sense, and it makes perfect sense as to how it was gotten away with.
Yeah, and I think, we have to be interested in that. And I always am in the mechanics of that. And how do you get rid of the body? How do you talk to police? I mean, my favorite thing to write are police talking to regular people from the regular people's point of view, because they're bringing all this. I know I would, like every movie and TV show you ever saw where a cop interviews someone, and the sort of heaviness of all of that, and that feeling that is never very far from me. I mean, I'm thinking so much about what you said, Alison. I think I do write about the things that scare me most too, because I thought most of my books are about shame in some way. And it's like, as a lapsed Catholic, that's one of, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame. So I do think that in some ways, as you said, we're kind of wrapping all this raiment around it, the stuff that we're interested in, fascinations, things going on in the culture. But so beneath it all that, we can try to answer. It's like that thing, we're all just trying to solve one case. I have it written above my computer, but I think that's true of all writers, and maybe all of us, is like why it keeps coming back to this.
Exactly. It's like, oh, no, we're not through yet. No, we've got another round coming.
When I know we're almost out of time, but maybe we could end by recommending a book or something that we all recommend each other. So we'll take that out of it. But something you read, even if it's not new, in the last year or so, that you want to give a shout out to.
Me? I'm so bad at titles. I'm going to jump into. I really liked Kevin Wilson's "Nothing to See Here." So surprising and so unexpected. It was a book that several people, from my publisher, but I'm especially thinking of Virginia Stanley, the wonderful librarian liaison there, who had such remarkable taste. She sent it to me early. She's like, "You'll love it." And I was like, I really don't know what to do with this book about children who spontaneously burst into flame. It's about a young woman.
Remember the cover.
Yeah. I had and I think it's a good example of sometimes you just sort of need to see where the writer is taking the concept, because he took it. It's a deeply, deeply empathetic book, which takes this strange and horrible situation. You talk about, I'm like, oh, give me credit because I figured out a way to set up a really good murder for hire business. Kevin Wilson clearly thought through every single consequence of what happens if you have two small children who are capable of bursting into flame when they become upset. I really love that. And I loved Luster as well. I thought Luster.
That's my pick. Yeah.
Oh, well,
no, that's perfect. So we'll give a double shout out to Raven Lalani, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that was a revelation to me. For those who don't know it, it came out last year. It's this slim little novel. I think it's a debut. Is it?
It is a debut. She worked in publishing, and it had gotten all this push about, oh, it's so sexy, and it is sexy, but I felt it was a really interesting. I mean, I think she's Gen Z, maybe. I don't think she's a millennial, but I felt it was the best insight I had into a much younger person's life.
Exactly. It's the premise is this young woman who's working in publishing and is, sort of barely making ends meet, and is laid off, is just as she's embarking on this relationship with this married man, and it's an open marriage, and I won't say too much more about it, but it's one of the fascinating things is she starts to do like Seamless or Door. I forget what meal delivery service that she's working.
They don't name it. I think she doesn't identify who she's delivering.
She's part of the gig economy, barely making ends meet, and is in this really complicated relationship that gets more complicated, and it is sexy in none of the ways that you would think is sexy, but it's also just sort of haunting and moving and visceral, and the language is, you can feel like you can taste it. It's and it was just really thrilling, and it's a great example of not necessarily always reading straight in your lane, because it's not a crime novel. It's not, it maybe not another time it wouldn't be a novel I would come across, but I found it riveting.
Great. Well, I have this book right next to me, so I can even hold it up. But I'm reading this true crime memoir that I love called "We Keep the Dead Close" by
Oh,
Becky.
yes,
Oh, I've heard good things about that.
It's wonderful, and it's got a little bit of I'll Be Gone in the Dark to it, because it's about this young woman's obsession with, who was a former Harvard student, with a Harvard murder, and she goes back to Harvard at 30 and researches it, and goes and even sees the professor that they believe was responsible for this murder. And it's really well told. It's very, it's really evocative. And usually with a lot of these things, I've read a lot of sort of true crime memoirs, because it seems like, it's a bit of a trend now. I'm always skipping back to the crime on a lot of them, and I don't care so much about the person's investigation. But in this one, I'm really fascinated with her and her outlook and her investigation. I'm really enjoying it. So
that is tricky form. When it goes bad, it goes really bad. When they mix up the mix of how much memoir, how much crime, and it's way too much memoir and it's not good.
Or when they try to force the obsession, that seems like a thing, like, and it's like, that's it. This is very genuine and really interesting. So, yeah.
I miss you guys.
Yes, I know. I want to order another round later. But this was fun, and here's to next time in person, and many rounds.
Yes,
in
absolutely.
New Orleans or wherever we find each other. This is a great conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. And thank you to St. William's Festival.
Yes, thank you, St. William's Festival.